Okay, I'm getting the blanket back out for this one because I need to talk about something that's kind of been bothering me. A few weeks ago, I was watching the Witcher 4 tech demo at the 2025 State of Unreal, genuinely excited about what I was seeing. And of course, one of the first things that I realized is that Ciri looked incredible. I immediately noticed a difference in her design, and I remember thinking, oh wow, they actually listened to fan feedback and refined her design. That's a little bit surprising. Then, not even a few hours later, CD Projekt Red tells press that they hadn't changed her, besides two very minor adjustments. And basically that what I was seeing with my own eyes wasn't actually what I was seeing. You know that feeling when someone says or does something right in front of you, and then when you point it out, they look you in the eye and they tell you that it never happened? Yeah, that's kind of what it feels like being a gamer in 2025. I think we're all being gaslit pretty hard at this point. The state of the industry as a whole has gotten more and more questionable over the years, but lately it seems like it's all been coming to a head, and over again, I've recognized the pattern of being told that what we're seeing, feeling, and experiencing is actually not the case. This is kind of an important thing, and it matters to me because there used to be a time when you could generally trust what the industry professionals were telling you. When a studio said they hadn't changed something, they hadn't changed it. When they explained why a game underperformed, their reasoning typically aligned with what players were actually experiencing. And when companies talked about their design choices, their explanations felt genuine and transparent. But somewhere along the way, that started to change. Now, I find myself constantly second-guessing official statements and cross-referencing a studio's or journalist claims with what I can see with my own eyes. And I'm always wondering if there's some other angle or narrative being pushed. The erosion of that basic trust between the gaming industry and us, their audience, that's what really bothers me, because when you don't have that basic foundation, when you feel like you can't trust the people making the games to be honest about the games they're making, everything else starts to crumble. So today we're gonna talk about some recent examples of industry gaslighting because I fear the feeling of, I think I'm going crazy, has finally caught up with me. Let's start with the moment that really sparked this whole video and honestly made me question my own eyes. CD Projekt Red delivered a beautiful tech demo that gave us a gorgeous slice of the direction that they're hoping to take with Witcher 4. Kelpie looks like she just got plucked out of Anna Sewell's novel, and the world of the game is absolutely captivating. And yes, they're telling us that the demo is running at 60 FPS with full ray tracing on a base PS5, which is pretty cool, I guess, even though this is just a demo. So after watching this not gameplay of Witcher 4, I was a little bit conflicted. I wanted to be excited, but not too excited, while also being especially cautious since I'll be playing it on a PC. RIP to any Xbox Series S users. But then I saw Ciri and my heart just lifted. I was genuinely kind of in awe of how beautiful she looked. She felt like the Ciri I remembered, the one I'd fallen in love with in Witcher 3, and I thought, wow, they obviously listened to fans on this, and honestly, I was really grateful and impressed. I thought it was such a smart move to make changes and improve her design to just have her be more in line with the old look and feel from the previous game. Although I am very sorry to this man who felt differently. But then, after fans began to celebrate and speculate, CD Projekt Red tells the press, "We have not modified Ciri's face." According to them, this was the same model that was used for The Witcher 3, the cinematic reveal trailer from the Game Awards last December, and the new tech demo from earlier this month. They said it was adapted to work with the latest metahuman technology, but that the model was the exact same. And then, after talking about it even further, they almost kind of cautiously admitted that they made slight improvements to her eye area. And then I just sat there squinting at Ciri's face for the next 10 minutes, feeling really dumb and comparing the two like I was going crazy because I thought that I could clearly see a pretty big difference. At this point, I've seen all the talking points, even from CD Projekt Red themselves: lighting, camera angles, cinematics versus the tech demo rendering. And yes, those do play a role. And listen, I am not a tech whiz by any means, but the bottom line is that when you put all three pictures up side by side, come on, she clearly looks pretty different, right? Right? Between the cinematic reveal and this latest version in the tech demo, there have clearly been some changes made, and it's an obvious improvement that we should be celebrating. Now, you might be saying, NPC, is this even that big of a deal? You know what? You're probably right. But here's the thing. I was pretty surprised when they first revealed Ciri's design in the cinematic last year, and I was not alone. There was a whole range of responses. For me, I had no problem with the fact that she is older, and even though I love Geralt, I also had no problem with him not being the main protagonist. My problem was that her design was just weird. It was just off. It didn't look like the Ciri I had remembered, even with her being aged up. It was like they were randomly trying to give us some new Temu Ciri. And now that she clearly looks different and more like her previous model in such a good way, why are we being told that we're essentially imagining these improvements? I don't know, just take the W, say, yeah, we worked to refine her look, and move on. We're never gonna be mad at you for giving a beloved character the Sonic treatment, which, by the way, worked out really well for Paramount. They're literally working on Sonic 4 as I speak, so please make this make sense. CD Projekt Red, your demo looked amazing, and your fans love you and they just want to praise you. Just let them. All right, moving on to BioWare, EA, and Dragon Age the Veilguard, because yes, the horse isn't quite dead enough. This is a perfect textbook example of blame deflection, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around how all of this is played out. So Dragon Age the Veilguard came out last October, a game that could have cost up to $250 million to make, and as we all know, it did not go well, to say the least. Critics and journalists across the board gave this game incredibly high scores. They were eating it up. Some even called it the best in the series, and Metacritic even gave it an 89, with 0 negative reviews, actually. Users, they gave it just a 3.9. That's a pretty huge gap, and now we just have this weird situation where we're told by the industry that this is a great game. I mean, just look at the review scores, but players are having a much different experience, and this whole situation just added more fuel to the fire of gamers not trusting professional reviews. When there's such a massive disconnect between critics and players, what are we supposed to believe? What is the actual truth when it comes to the quality of the game? So all of this went down last October, and it seems like it had pretty much fallen to the wayside, a memory that everyone was just trying to forget until, for whatever reason, multiple reports and articles came out just recently attempting to figure out the real reasons for this game's commercial failure. According to EA CEO Andrew Wilson, the game failed because it didn't resonate with a broad audience that wants shared world features and live services. Okay, I guess I'll have to take your word for it on that one, Andrew. According to Bloomberg, the blame was on the 10-year developmental cycle of pure chaos, including numerous internal pivots, project shifts, and the scrapping of those pesky live service integrations. But if you look at what players and many longtime fans of the series had to say, you see a different story. Some of the common criticisms reflect things like lack of player agency, dismissal of established lore, shallow combat systems, unlikable characters, weak storytelling, and yes, poorly written dialogue that felt very preachy and awkward. So many Dragon Age fans have said that it just did not feel like a true Dragon Age game. And this misfire on EA's part directly led to them falling short of their 3 million player target by about 50% after it was reported that only 1.5 million players engaged with the game. Layoffs followed, and EA's been trying really hard for the last 8 months to place the blame somewhere, but instead of listening to legitimate player criticisms or looking at the past 10 years of corporate meddling, their response was to essentially blame the gamers. Whew, there's almost too much gaslighting here to keep track of, but I feel like the facts are pretty clear. EA and BioWare put out a mediocre at best game, and their design decisions and motives were just not what the audience was looking for. And then when the criticisms started rolling in, they blamed the audience and said it was their fault. How are we supposed to have honest conversations about what went wrong and how to avoid those mistakes in the future if we can't even agree on reality? But EA's got nothing on Ubisoft. Listen, I used to be a pretty big Ubisoft fan, okay? Assassin's Creed 2, Black Flag, Origins, Far Cry 4, and of course, the one I'm sure you're all thinking of, Just Dance. These games were a huge part of my gaming life, so watching what's happened to this company, it genuinely does hurt to see. Like a tale as old as time, Ubisoft has been struggling after their recent debacles. They unfortunately suffered some pretty big losses after the underperformance of Assassin's Creed Shadows and Star Wars Outlaws, and what was their response? Well, they of course followed this new industry trend where their CEO blamed the gamers. Now, there was a lot of controversy surrounding this game before it even came out, and it was reported that Ubisoft actually had an anti-harassment plan in place when the game launched. It's wild to think that they were literally preparing for backlash before this game even came out. And just a really quick side note on this, I don't like the attacking or harassment of an individual developer. It is pretty wild to be in the business of making games for a living, something that's inherently supposed to be fun and engaging, an escape for consumers, something that for the most part should be a joy to work on, and somehow put yourselves in a situation where you're preparing for backlash over things that you intentionally acknowledged, chose to do, and could have completely avoided. It's like knowing the future, but still making the decisions that led to your death. But I digress. Ubisoft was a company that used to pride itself on delivering historically accurate and culturally appreciative games. So the fact that they're the ones that are making these missteps and also having some pretty disappointing responses to their Japanese community, it feels really bad. I mean, we're talking about a game set in Japan that many Japanese people are clearly not liking. When Shadows was delayed and pre-orders slumped, instead of recognizing legitimate concerns from a large portion of the community, including the Japanese community, or recognizing that a lot of fans were calling out and preferring their direct competitor, Ghost of Tsushima, Ubisoft's CEO essentially said gamers were at fault. When Star Wars Outlaws sold only 1 million copies in the first month, he had claimed that gamers have extraordinary expectations that are basically impossible to meet, even when delivering solid quality. Yeah, it's honestly a fascinating timeline here. Pre-launch, we expect some kind of toxic pushback. Post-launch sales dip, gamers complain too much. Investor call, solid quality is not enough. They're shifting the blame at every step, and when leadership reframes lukewarm sales as proof that players are too picky, every critique becomes toxic by default. But is that really the only option here? Are there no other alternative reasons as to why your game didn't sell as well as you'd hoped? When gamers toxic becomes the default response anytime concerns are raised, it really starts to wear you down. It feels like being told that your years of support and investment in these franchises basically count for nothing, and that it was never to benefit us, it was all for them, the company. And yes, I know it is a business and the whole goal for the business is to make money, but it's weird because it's almost like the consumers have no say, that what we want doesn't matter and we should just appreciate whatever it is that they deem fit to give us. That wanting good games makes us the problem. And what happened after all of this? Well, the market responded exactly how you'd expect, and their stock dropped by about 17%. I've never been an EA girl, but for Ubisoft in particular, this cuts even deeper than just normal bad business practices, because just like with my emotions with Nintendo, when you support a company for years and have so many good memories of playing their games, recommending them to friends, watching them repeatedly just turn around and blame you, their fan, for their failures feels like such a betrayal. This brings me to something I'd like to call the indie reality check. We're seeing massive AAA titles flounder all around us, and yet somehow we're also watching indies and indie-like titles completely blow up and experience huge success. The AAA studios have their ideas for why titles are failing, but when you look at the other side of the coin, the games that are actually winning, it tells a completely different story. And honestly, this gives me hope because it proves that the problem isn't with gamers, it's with the approach. And nobody said this better than Sven Vincke from Larian at the Game Awards in 2023.
Studio made their game because they wanted to make a game that they wanted to play themselves. They understood the value of respect, that if they treated their developers and players well, those same developers and players would forgive them when things didn't go as planned. But above all, they cared about their game because they loved games. It's really that simple.
Now, I know Larian technically is no longer an indie studio, but he literally laid out the formula for success. They made a game that they wanted to play themselves. It's really that simple. The people in charge forbade them from cramming the game with anything other than a team first, entertainment first, consumer-first approach, and they knew that if they did this, then the revenue would inevitably follow. When you focus on making an incredible game first, an engaging world, likable characters that draw you in, fun mechanics, compelling storytelling, and natural character development, the experience is not only fully immersive, but very successful. And when you look at some of the criticisms surrounding Dragon Age the Veilguard and you put it against Baldur's Gate 3, it showed that you can even have more progressive elements in your game without them feeling forced or performative. And their success clearly proves that. Despite what the media might say, no, I don't believe the majority of players are a mixture of is and phobes. I know everyone has their preferences, but across the board, most gamers can agree that they do not want developers sacrificing quality for messaging. If you've got forced messaging and an obvious lack of quality, you're in trouble because you're clearly not respecting the player, and that respect is so important. Baldur's Gate 3 respects the player and their intelligence, and it honestly lets you engage with themes organically and in a way that makes sense, a lot of times when and if you choose to. But Dragon Age tells you what to think and when to think it. So while AAA companies are telling us that microtransactions, live service elements, and $80 price tags are required, Sven and his team proved that the exact opposite approach works much better. Speaking of $80 price tags, allow me to follow up on my Nintendo video for just a minute. Nintendo launched the Switch 2 with marketing about how they've fixed and updated all of the original's problems, and very interestingly, they also noted that the Hall effect precision for the Joy-Cons would not be present for the Switch 2 for whatever reason. But even with that being the case, they said they had designed these sticks from the ground up to be more durable. And yeah, unfortunately, some players are already experiencing Joy-Con drift 2.0. There's also been reports of consoles shutting down without low battery warnings due to a bug and just general poorer battery life than anticipated. And Nintendo has quietly posted hidden recovery mode fixes and released information on how to patch these issues. Now, when you launch a new and improved console that immediately sees some of the same problems as the previous one, but you've specifically marketed it as having solved those problems, that's just not a good look. But the real gaslighting comes in how they frame any criticism. When fans pointed out that $80 for Mario Kart World, the 16th entry in the franchise, feels excessive, especially when indie studios are delivering fuller experiences for $50, Nintendo's messaging essentially becomes, well, you should be grateful we're giving you anything at all. Doug Bowser literally told consumers who couldn't afford a Switch 2 to just buy the original Switch instead. Well, Mr. Bowser, given some of these early hardware issues, you might have helped some people dodge a bullet. Oh, and speaking of Switch 2 demand, someone was apparently so frustrated that they couldn't get one that they hijacked a Nintendo truck and stole over $1.4 million worth of consoles, which honestly, I don't know. That just feels like the most Nintendo thing to happen during a console launch. But let's get back on track and talk about some legitimate indie studios who are truly becoming the David to these AAA Goliaths. Sandfall Interactive and Clair Obscur should continue to get all the praise. You might not know this, but they only have 34 core developers working on the game. Yes, the media has begun to try and honestly completely diminish this by making sure to clarify that Sandfall had many other teams who contributed to the success of the game, you know, the same as any other studio, but the facts are still the facts. They only had 34 game developers. We've also seen other indies like Citizen Sleeper, 1000 Resist, and Another Crab's Treasure hitting 1 million in sales with full teams smaller than most AAA marketing departments. Pizza Tower, made by a super small team, has sold over 1 million copies. Hades was made by Supergiant with a team of around 20 and became a cultural phenomenon. Celeste, the beloved platformer that tackled heavy themes, was made by just 7 people. And Gris, the beautiful exploration of grief and loss, was made by less than 20 people and has sold over 3 million copies at this point. These aren't flukes. They're proof that quality has nothing to do with the size of the team. And another great thing about these teams that are pushing boundaries and crafting unique and engaging stories is that for the most part, indies don't blame audiences when something flops. They don't call their critics toxic, they just focus on making the best games possible. Games that they themselves would love to play. The indie reality check shows us that when developers focus on passion over profit, respect their audience, and prioritize game quality over corporate mandates or checkboxes, success can and hopefully will follow. It shows us that it's not about the size of your team or your budget, it's about your heart and your honesty. Which brings me to one of the most frustrating examples of industry gaslighting, the weaponization of the toxic gamer label. And this was brought to the forefront again pretty recently with the release of Stellar Blade on PC. Like its initial launch, the PC release has been a massive success. Within the first week, it sold over 1.1 million copies on Steam, and it's now sold over 3 million copies across all platforms. But unfortunately, many of our beloved media were not super happy with the protagonist in this game. One journalist even called Eve a doll sexualized by someone who had never seen a woman. They ended up having to issue a full apology after it was said that Eve's design was actually scanned directly from a Korean model. And then, of course, other articles implied that the game's success was just because Eve only catered to the male gaze. Players, including women, clearly connected with this character and game, but somehow appreciating the character design became a moral failing. Here's where the gaslighting gets obvious. When games like Outlaws and Forspoken underperform, and when some fans express disappointment about not seeing the return of beloved protagonists like Jin Sakai or Geralt, it's because gamers are sexist and they can't handle female leads. But then we get a very female-focused game with female characters and a very prominent female lead, and it's super successful. I don't know, maybe it's not quite as they say. Even with the success of Stellar Blade aside, there are lots of other examples of this. Again, take Clair Obscur as another easy one. It's got a majority female cast, and it's basically been praised by every gamer across the board. Or how about one of my personal favorites, a Plague Tale series? And even when I look at upcoming games like Last Sentinel, Tides of Annihilation, Resident Evil 9, or the new female protagonist in the first Berserker Kazan, the community generally seems pretty hyped. These games are getting very positive reception and excitement from the same audience that supposedly is sexist. So how does that work? The pattern is just too clear. According to many of our media and developers, when games with female protagonists succeed, it's despite gamers. When they fail, it's because of gamers. This really makes no sense. And like I've said many times in multiple videos at this point, gamers love female characters. We just want good ones. Series like Tomb Raider, Metroid, Horizon, Bayonetta, and so many more are all examples of very prominent female characters with massive devoted fan bases. And when the industry deflects legitimate criticism by labeling it as toxicity, it's a perfect way to avoid addressing the real problems with their products. When every piece of feedback gets dismissed as sexism or bigotry, you lose the ability to actually improve. And more importantly, you lose the trust of people who genuinely want you to succeed. It's not about the gender of the protagonist, it's about the quality of the character and their ability to resonate with the audience. And we should not be gaslit into thinking that this standard is the problem. At the end of the day, even though some of these examples were a little bit more minor than others, what disappoints me the most about all of this gaslighting is that the majority of us actually want developers to succeed. We want games to succeed. Gaming is the greatest storytelling medium that we have, and when it's done right, nothing else comes close. That's why this industry generates more money than all other forms of entertainment combined. I've loved games my whole life because they've always had the unique ability to just draw me into a story in a way that's so much more powerful than movies or books. And they've introduced me to characters that I still think about so many years later. So please, we are not asking for perfection. We just want honesty. If you change something to better reflect your audience's wishes, you should feel encouraged to celebrate that, even if it's something very minor. And if your game isn't connecting with consumers, maybe that means you should look at your decisions leading up to the release instead of pointing fingers at us. When games succeed because they give gamers what they want, a lot of times the industry says it's just pandering. And when games fail because they ignore what gamers want, it's our fault for being too demanding. It's all a bit exhausting and it makes no sense, and we're tired of pretending that it does. We love this medium because it lets us live stories. We'll happily pay for greatness, but when you shrug off quality control, raise prices mid-generation, insult us, and then somehow spin the blame back on us, it feels like some sort of weird emotional whiplash, and we, as the audience, as the customer, just want better. For us, for the developers, for the games, we just want better. Even though it's been a rough few years, I still believe this industry and its leaders can turn things around. We've been seeing it happen more and more recently, and it feels like there might be a real shift starting. Because when studios are passionate about their vision and truly respect their audience, lightning strikes and magic can happen. But it starts with honest conversations and mutual respect. We are not your enemies. We're actually your biggest cheerleaders. We just need you to trust that we want the same thing as you. Great games. Thanks so much for making it to the end of this video, and look at this! First and foremost, I want to thank you all so much for being here, and I hope that my 300 Spartans are still here and can see just how far we've come.
This is where we hold them! This is where we fight!
We've got an army of almost 160,000 strong now. This channel really is dedicated to the hope that we can just get back to the real heart of games, that player joy can be brought back to the forefront, and we can all start to really love this medium again. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about all of this. Has the industry been gaslighting you too, or are you wise beyond your years? Either way, the more we call out this kind of behavior, the harder it becomes for them to get away with it. Thank you again for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.